You can edit it out. But anyway, Tyson and I, we did a few days in the studio where we rehearsed in North Carolina. And Softly is, I think, in Durham area. And so we stopped by and we did an in the studio thing. And we went for like an hour and a half. And we're really deep. Like we had these just great deep conversations. And one of the kids running it says, "It's not recording." And we're like, how do we go back and capture the magic of just this spontaneous, where the conversation went and the depth and everything else?
That's tough. So I have a recording on my computer right now. We have it in the cloud. And then I have a little soundboard, a Rodecaster recorded onto an SD card. I was talking he was a Marine F-18 test pilot. Older guy, he flew at like opening days at Desert Storm, then goes to test pilot school. He's up in Pax River. He has a flight control issue. It's a Saudi F-18 that they're doing a test flight on before they send it over. Coming in, the jet rolls. He's got a backseater who's his like XO who punches, initiates the sequence. XO goes out like when they're at 90 degrees of bank. He ejects inverted 380 feet off the ground. Like he lands, it rips his chin off, like he gets drugged, like this gnarly thing. But right as he's telling me that story, I have a lightning strike like 4 houses over and completely crushes everything. I was like, you got to be kidding me. And so it zapped my computer. The soundboard wasn't recording. And I go through all these like Zencaster, to their credit. I'm like messing like, hey, is there any, like, this has got to be in the cloud somewhere. Is there a way to like recover it? And I mean, it was like ones and zeros, copying and pasting in browsers and all this like hex code. And I was able to capture it. But I was like, man, you got like, you cannot talk about like worse timing than that, So I did hit record. We're going in 3 places. So
yeah, there's a magic that sometimes happens. And if you miss it, we noticed the same thing with music. And one of the tunes on the first album, Silence and Light, the actual song Silence and Light, we were in North Carolina and Jason Everman, one of my bandmates, did this. He had a delay pedal, and on a delay pedal, like the rate, you can speed up, right? And so it would speed up and speed up as he was just sitting there. This song was building. And it sped up to the point where it sounded like crickets chirping. And we were like, oh, dude, it's like this audible, as we're just kind of like letting this song build while we're playing it live, like one of the very first times ever. And so we've got this cricket background noise, and we could never capture it again. So we had it recorded. This was just rehearsal. We had it recorded. And I even sent that track. I was able to get that track isolated from our rehearsal studio, send it to the producer, but he couldn't make it work on the album recording because we could never replicate it again. Like it just happened. So instead, I had a producer sampled night sounds, like cricket night sounds off of some plugin, and that's what we used for the song.
You got to be creative, but man, it's like when those moments happen, it's so frustrating if you lose it to something like that,
Yeah. What kind of plane? I had this is just totally out of nowhere, but as you were talking about the guy ejecting and everything else, I went to a survival school in Spokane, Washington. Okay. And, for people that don't know, the Army has, SEER level C, and that's very much like a product of Vietnam. And it's a special forces run school, but it's pretty violent. You get captured. They teach you all these things, and then at the very end, they put you through like a 8-day survival and evasion, and that turns into a 36-hour detention, which is very Vietnam POW style thing, and interrogations and things like that. But I went to one in Spokane, Washington, when I was in OTC for Delta Force, so the operator training course. And I had been to this school before from Ranger Recon. And the instructors there didn't know that. They didn't like run my social to see. And I was actually using all the techniques that I had been taught. And they're like, what the fuck is this guy? Like, they can't break roll. What the fuck is this guy's deal? And I'm sitting there being interrogated. They set me up in like, let's pretend you're on TV and we're interviewing you. We're the bad guys. Like, they're not telling you this. You're just living this, scenario. And one of the guys asking me questions was Scott O'Grady.
Really?
Yeah. And I'm looking at the guy and I'm going, I know you from somewhere. Yeah. Where do I know you from? And I'm using all these techniques and everything else. And all of a sudden, one of the instructors comes around the corner and he goes, hey, you, come here. And I was like, wow, they're break and roll with me. This is crazy. And so Scott O'Grady gets up, and this guy, they pull me around the corner, and they're like, have you been here before? And I'm like, yeah. And so they asked me my social and my full name because they didn't have my name right. They were also training their interrogators to try and figure out who we were and all of that stuff. So anyway, I'm talking with the two of them, and I was like, hey, nice to meet Scott, that kind of thing. And I realized, like, oh, he's that guy that was shot down over Bosnia. And
what year was that you went to that SEER?
So that would have been, I think, 98, either 98 or 99. I went the first time in, I think, 96 or 97. So I'd only been like a year, 2 years prior.
That's funny that... So I went through the same SEER program there, the 3-week course. You learn how to survive out in the wilderness, and then you have to evade. And then, surprise, surprise, no matter if you successfully evade, you get captured. You go to the camp, spend a couple of days at the camp. I also got to go through advanced beatings, which I'm sure you did a few of those, which was always that was entertaining. We actually did that in our fighter squadron, which was unique in itself because it was kind of a non-standard deal. But Scott O'Grady, that's one of those guys. There's two scenarios now at SEER school they go through. I mean, there's multiple ones, but one, there's F-117 that got shot down in Bosnia. And that dude, like, he was in his chute. He was on his radio. He did everything by the book, and he got picked up in a matter of like 45 minutes. And then Scott O'Grady, he spent a little bit of time on the ground. So I'm sure he had a few lessons learned to share and impart on everyone.
Yeah. It was just interesting because it wasn't, definitely he and I, as this interrogation is happening in training where they can't break roll, and we're both trying to like figure it out. And it was hilarious. So I was thinking, oh, they're going to pull me out of the scenario now because I've already been in it. And so the whole rest of the time, which was probably another 18 hours, the whole time I'm like, oh, any second now, they're going to open my cell and be like, okay, you're done. And they never did. So I got to do it 2 full times. So I literally been to like slappy, SEER school 3 times, full time.
Jeez.
And
so, everyone's going through SEER school. Like, I'm just trying to keep a low profile. I think I was assistant SRO. So assistant, senior ranking officer, for those listening don't know that. And so you got a bullseye, like you're going to be the lightning rod. You're just trying not to get slapped as many times as possible. But all the like pararescue guys going through, we didn't have anyone else from any other service. Pararescue, TACPs, and JTACs. Like when you're in a little cell, like you would always just hear one of the captors at some point just be like, Jesus Christ, because they would open up their cell and like a PJ would just be naked or wearing a thong. Like, cause they're just like, like they know they're going to get through and they know they're going to get slapped, but every like pilot, just like blinders on, like trying to get through, like, don't slap me, don't slap me, don't slap me.
Yeah, might as well have some fun with it while we can. It's the little victories, right?
That's what it's all about. Small victories all the time and just getting through that program. Yeah. But I don't know. Yeah. It was good. Well, Brad, I'm excited to have you on the podcast, man. We first met on Mentors for Mill. I was fortunate to be able to co-host and sit there where we got to meet. You have an amazing background. You're doing some incredible stuff right now. We're going to dig into all that on the podcast. So before we get rolling, I always like to ask everyone to give me the 30 to 60 second elevator pitch. I'm actually not going to ask you to do that. We're going to do something a little non-standard. So just for those listening, Brad, Delta Force operator. He is in the band Silence in the Light. And I want to kind of work backwards for you because there's a lot of stuff we can't talk about that you did in your career, things that we're forever grateful for, or people don't know they're grateful for, that you were out there answering and doing some hard work with your brothers and sisters for that matter. So thanks for doing that. But I want to kind of start where you left the Army. So you spent 12 years in Delta, is that correct?
Yeah. I got there went to selection in the fall of 1998 and got selected. My first child was due right about the time that I was supposed to report to OTC, which is about a year-long operator training course. And so I ended up deferring. They told me to defer, stay at home, deal with the baby, all of that stuff. And so I had about 6 months kind of in limbo from the Ranger Recon Detachment to going to the start of OTC. So I started OTC in the spring of 1999 and retired from there in December of 2010.
So in that time frame, again, I know you did just an incredible amount of work. I didn't mention too in kind of the opening, the movie Black Hawk Down, you were in Mogadishu involved in that. So again, from the start of your military career to the end of it, I would say is probably atypical and rather high tempo. I mean, I know there are a lot of your peers that felt that, but for the vast majority of the military, they're never going to get shot at. That was something you were doing it day in and day out and training for. But when you left in 2010, in my mind, your career, a lot of highs and probably a lot of low lows. What was it like stepping out from just such a high tempo, high adrenaline organization into the civilian world?
So I talk about this a fair amount in just the transition and going from, you work for the president at Delta Force. It's not like you fall under some general that's giving you guidance to go do dumb stuff and things like that. So it was very important work. Not that everything in the military isn't important work. I would say the things that I liked the most about being there were the things that nobody knows about that happened, or the things that we prepared for and trained for that nobody knows about that didn't happen. There was a lot of that. Like, hey, this mission that we were supposed to do in X place that, man, it would have been an amazing thing. And it just didn't happen for whatever reason. So there was a part of me that knew going into transitioning out of the military that, hey, you're never going to get this same type of, feedback. You're never going to feel the same way, maybe the level of importance, maybe the camaraderie, whatever it might be. I also knew going into transitioning out that, like, I'm able to do it on my terms. And there are a lot of guys that weren't able to do it on their terms. They got injured, they got medically retired, were significantly banged up, whatever it might be. And so I'm having my cake and eating it too. And so I felt kind of grateful. I'll tell you the things that I've seen with some other folks is that there's like this 18 to 24 month like grace period where I'm out of the military. I'm excited I'm out of the military. I can smoke weed if I want. I can do this. I don't have to listen to the man. I can wear whatever clothing. I can grow my hair out, whatever it might be. And then it starts to kind of fall apart where, man, that purpose isn't there anymore. And the thing that I'm doing now isn't as important as the thing I did back then. And so I think I was maybe slightly different in that I just kind of went into the whole process knowing that these are things that are going to happen to me. And even in 2010, that was 11 years ago, even in 2010, it wasn't as good as things are now. There was no out the door committee, here are all these counseling services. Here's, there was nothing, man. It was like, all right, turn your badge in, out process and you're out the door.
When I out processed active duty, it's like a 3-page checklist. You got to run around base and get everything signed off. I guess saying you don't have a library book that you're going to steal, You know,
I forged all of mine.
I'm not going to say I didn't do that as well. I'm like, this is dumb. Like, I'm going to turn in my badges for the appropriate security thing so I don't go to jail. And then past that, like, this is dumb. I've never been to the motor pool to check out a vehicle. At least not me.
Post library.
Yeah, you're right. Like, what? I mean, all these things are like just acidine, but nonetheless is there. But when I turned in my checklist so I could like leave and get the final like stamp of my orders, whatever, I was thinking, I don't know, whatever. I wasn't thinking it was gonna be grandiose, but I figured it'd be like a, hey, thanks. We'll see you later. It was literally, I just left my checklist on someone's desk. I got in the car and I drove off base, and that was it. You know, like, okay, that was a pretty anticlimactic, you know, to my 12 years.
I had virtually the same experience, other than the person that I had to turn it into, the Fort Bragg person that I had to turn whatever portion of the checklist into. They said, "Oh, this is weird. Like, these are usually stamps, but these have signatures." And I was like, "Ooh, like they're totally going to bust me that I forged all this stuff." But similarly, I'd never been to transportation on post. I'd never been to the on post library to check out books. I forged all that stuff, turned it into the right person, turned into my badge, and then drove out the gate. And I think the unit at least did then, they did a pretty good job of, like, you can have your family into the compound. It's kind of the first time ever. You know, and you're in the Charlie Beckwith room, and there's like historical photos and pictures that nobody would ever see before, you know, that kind of thing. And your whole family can be there. You have to turn in an invite list. And they give you all kinds of, you know, going away plaques and the thanks plaque and all that stuff. And it's, you know, that's a pretty cool thing. But it's like, all right, let's go to the chow hall, have some snacks, and then see you later. And that's kind of it, you know.
I think it's one of those things too, and the machine keeps on churning. I think a lot of guys, you want to think you're important, right? And not to like downplay any, like everyone's important and they're a team player, but military is a machine. Like, it keeps churning. It's ones and zeros and keeps pumping out people. And when you leave, there's someone to fill your gap. I know for me, I think that was kind of like the initial, maybe not even like initial struggle, but like, oh yeah, like it keeps on moving. Like, I wasn't the linchpin that held this thing together, you know?
Yeah.
But
yeah, it's you know, I talk with people about transition, and I talk about a lot with people about there is no program that's going to help, you know, the 22 vets a day that decide to commit suicide. Like, the Army's job, the military's job, is to, exactly as you said, it's to get guys in, recruit people, fight wars, kill bad guys, support, you know, that whole mechanism, whatever it might be. That's their job. It's not to make you feel good about your time in the service. It's not to, you know, give you this 2-year-long transition out, feel good party, you know, whatever it is. That's not their job. So the only thing that's going to fix the veteran community is the veteran community.
And that's kind of like right now what you're doing. Can you talk a little bit about Silence in the Light? I imagine that had to be the driving factor, or one of the driving factors for you to kind of pursue music and the band. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, for sure. So the long story is, you know, soon after separating and everything else, you know, my wife and I do like a date night every Friday. And I would tell her, you know, have a couple cocktails and then go have a nice dinner or something like that. And I would tell her, you know, I feel like I'm a ship out on the ocean and I'm just looking for the spotlight. Like, just tell me what to do. What can I do to help? And it was kind of interesting. From week to week, it would always change. Like, one week I'm running for president, you know, the next week I'm you know, standing up something or doing, you know, something like that. And that went on for the better part of, and again, this wasn't right after I separated. This was probably 4 or 5 years after I separated. And one day she was in the room that I'm sitting in the house, and she said, "Man, it's a shame you're not doing something with all this music equipment." And I was playing, you know, I play all the time, and just have like this massive collection of gear and stuff like that. But it really kind of hit home. It wasn't until the next day I was driving into Manhattan to meet a buddy of mine, Jason Everman, who was the guy that served in the Rangers about the same time that I served, and he played in Nirvana and Soundgarden prior to joining the Army in 1994. And I was driving in to meet him, and we were going to check out a Mastodon concert. And Jason and Bill Kelleher, one of the guitarists from Mastodon, like know each other. So we had some like backstage hookup from hanging out with the band kind of thing. So we're having some cocktails, and as I'm driving in, you know, I'm thinking about this, and I said, hey man, what if we put together something and we take the proceeds of royalties, like release an album, do something like that, and we give the proceeds to charitable organizations that help out veterans and first responders and things like that. And he was like, yeah, man, I'm down. And that's really where it started. So I stood up a social media page, and in as best as I could, tried to, you know, in a very short, social media kind of platform that you have, it was like, hey, this is who I am. This is what I'm doing. And the two of us are doing this thing. And it just started to grow organically.
How do you think for you, like what's different about you that leaving 20 years of military service, I guess seeing some gnarly stuff, and like you didn't fall into a trap or a pit or some other guys do, and not everyone does that, right? Like it's a small percentage, but it is a percentage. Like what are some keys to success and tips that you have that made your transition into a successful one?
So I've told this story before, so if anybody has heard it, you know, sorry for it. But
just fast forward.
In 1993, after the whole Black Hawk Down incident, we were still over in Somalia. A large portion of, you know, our task force had been significantly injured and flown off to Germany, flown back home, wherever it might be, and you know, we were still prepping to do missions to like rescue Mike Durant and things like that. And I don't think most people know about that, but as we were getting ready to come home, you know, the whole mission got kiboshed. You know, hey, we're bringing everybody home. That's it. It's over. And the Delta Force psych came over to talk to the handful of Rangers that were still there that had been a part of the battle. And he said, men, you've lived through something that could give you a lifetime of excuses. And, you know, you can go out and be a drunk and beat your wife and do all these, you know, negative activities and behaviors. And if you do that, I'm going to tell you something. You're letting the bad guys win. Don't let the bad guys win. And that was the only counseling we got, you know, coming back even from Mogadishu. There was no, hey, PTSD count. There was nothing. That stuck with me from then, you know, all the way through. And I still, I think, live by that today, where I don't want to use anything that's happened, you know, as an excuse for poor behavior, whatever that might be. And I'll take it a step further and I'll say, you know, not only is it letting the bad guy win, but I refuse to be a victim. Right? Like I signed up for this stuff. And although I experienced a lot of things that I didn't think when I joined in 1990 and there was no war, I didn't necessarily sign up to like go to combat, even though there was, you know, obviously a chance of that. Most of the people that joined in the early 90s Peacetime Army, like there was no war.
Yeah.
Like, most of the guys were like, they were getting college money. They were getting out 4 years later. They were going to college, getting college paid for, and then they were going to become whatever they were going to become. But I refuse to be a victim. And I don't want it to be like, oh, this bad thing happened to me, and I'm going to use that as an excuse for poor behavior and doing things that I shouldn't be doing. There have definitely been times when I've struggled with, you know, some of the stuff that I've lived through and dealt with and everything else. And, you know, to say that I haven't abused alcohol at times, fortunately, I don't have the addict gene, whatever that might be, where, you know, I get hooked on something. But there have been times when I've definitely done things that I've regretted because, you know, of trying to deal with stuff and everything else. You know, that's a reality. But I think ultimately, don't let the bad guys win, and, you know, don't be a victim. I think those are the two things that just kind of resonate with me and still do.
I mean, it's simple in saying that. And in my mind, I mean, it's really powerful. That's the first time I kind of ever I've heard it put that way. But just the fact that, it stuck with you, right? And I know I can't even imagine some of the stuff you've had to deal with, but being able to more or less package that up and then, that gets you through whatever you're dealing with I think it's pretty powerful.
Yeah. I've seen some stuff more recently, and this is something that I'm a work in progress, right? We're all a work in progress, and to say that I can't learn things or can't learn something from a situation or something else, is kind of foolish. Recently, this thing, and I'd love to talk about this too, something's kind of come to my attention, and it's nothing that I necessarily thought about before because it didn't really apply to me. I've seen a lot of guys that have struggled, that have dealt with things that were like that shameful, ashamed feeling. And maybe it was something that they did in combat. Maybe it was that they were fired from a unit. Maybe it was that they were RFS'd from the Rangers, and they carry that shame of whatever that thing is. They carry it with them. And I've had a chance to talk to a handful of guys that have lived that, and some of them very significantly. And I tell them the same thing, and that is like, nobody remembers, you're dealing with that, and you've made it an everyday thing that you wake up and think about and everything else, but nobody really remembers that. We're all dealing with our own stuff. And to think that so many years later, we're all sitting around talking about, you and that thing that you did that was horrible and you got fired or whatever it might be. I have a buddy that I went to the operator training course with, and I'm not going to talk about, say his name or anything else. He's one of the first guys that got significantly injured in Iraq and was on a rooftop, came in on a little bird, was on a rooftop, made a breach on the roof, and immediately got shot coming in the door by a guy that was like right behind him. And he kind of jammed everything up, and the door got jammed, and nobody could get in behind him. And the guy, when he shot him, got him right in the shoulder, and it killed the nerve in his arm. So now he's got like a dead hand, and he can't operate his gun. And so he grabs the guy and pulls him in close, and he gets shot like 3 more times in the side. And then finally a teammate comes in and gets the guy. And this dude, for all intents and purposes, is like one of the greatest heroes ever, right? Yeah. He gets stuck on fentanyl lollipops for 2 years. And this was at the very beginning of, kind of significant war in Iraq. Nobody knew what that stuff does. Nobody knew the long-term effects. So at some point in time, he gets weaned off the fentanyl lollipops, and he ends up taking something that he finds on the floor, that had fallen out of like a medic's aid bag, and he gets sent down the road and fired. That dude spent the better part of 8 years living in his pickup truck, addicted to heroin. True story. Jeez. So from absolutely the pinnacle of military service to that. And he's just now kind of like reaching out, and, hey, I'd love to come see you guys. I'd love to come hang. Like, yeah, nobody remembers that you got fired, man. Nobody remembers that. We all remember you as the hero, the guy. This guy lived next neighborhood over from me in Fayetteville, and we used to hang all the time on the weekends, and know his kids and all that stuff. And anyway, get back in, even if you've got that ashamed moment or that thing that you think, I can assure you, nobody cares. Nobody remembers, and they would rather have you and be a part of the brotherhood and the good memories and everything else. Like, we'd rather have that than other things, right?
100%. And that's one of those things I always tell people is like, no one cares more about your career or your life than you do. And I think it's applicable in this sense because when you're worried about something you messed up or you goofed up, everyone else is worried about what they goofed up and what they messed up, what's going on in their personal life. And they don't have enough time to worry about your shenanigans. Like, sure, like occasionally like a story, it depends on the scenario, right? Like someone gets fired, I got buddies, they bend metal in a jet, like it gets talked about, but then everyone like moves on. Like you care about the people you're around and your teammates and your friends because of the people they are, not necessarily the things they do. So it's one of those things. Like I think that's a salient point. Like you just got to get back out there and you got to show your face. Like showing up is 90% of the battle,
Yeah. And those, like I said, those guys, like nobody thinks ill of that, regardless of what you've done wrong. I've done stuff wrong. I've been, reprimanded, punished, whatever. And, years later, the other thing that's interesting is I've run into people that I did not like while we served together.
Yeah.
And, just because you're a Delta Force guy, just because you're a Ranger doesn't mean you're a great human being. Doesn't mean that, we all love each other and everything else. And I've run into people that I absolutely just despise. And generally speaking, like there's no, we're not vying for the same leadership position. We're not, that whole sharks smell blood in the water feast, mentality is kind of gone. And, to the same point as the guy that feels shame or whatever else, like the bad blood was gone. It was interesting because, hey, what do you do now? Oh, I do this. Like, no shit, and you start finding commonalities and, you're not playing the role.
Right.
And, you're the person you are. And it's totally different now.
That's interesting too. Cause it's gotta be the same way. Everything is a competition in the Air Force, fighter pilot world. Everything is a competition. You're always racked and stacked against your peers. There's a best bomb dropper, there's a best shooter, there's a best guy who's going out fighting BFM. You're all like everything you do. There's a number one and there's a number last. Like, and so that kind of it's a need, right? Like you need that competition to steel sharpens steel. But it's interesting, I guess, when you get outside that world where you never really got to necessarily know someone, because it's kind of the same way. You're not going to like everyone you're around just because you guys fly planes or work together. But getting outside that environment, you start to bump into people and you get to know them, I would say sometimes a little bit better, or like, turns out he's not a douchebag. It was just, I guess you're like the nature of the environment.
Yeah. Or you can still be someone that it might be someone that you might not hang out with on a Friday night, but you have this commonality now in that you both used to be this thing. You both used to do whatever. And, it's interesting to me that, like I said, running into a handful of guys that I wasn't necessarily fans of, and it's like water under the bridge. There is no drama anymore. And it's become more of a brotherhood and things like that. And that's why I say guys that are out there on the fringe that maybe feel that shame, or they got RFS from the Rangers or whatever it might be, like you would do yourself a lot of good too, just coming back and claiming that.
Yeah.
Which led me to another conversation I recently had with a handful of guys that I serve with. And that is, at some point in time, there's like a line that gets crossed, a good line, where you're now accepted as a part of the tribe. And so it could be maybe an event that you performed, phenomenally, and that might be the thing that you're accepted. But it's interesting because there are guys that fall short of that. Like the point being, it's like in the Ranger community, if a guy was there, it doesn't matter if he was there for 3 months or 6 months, he can say he was there. And no one in the Ranger community is going to be like, what? He only did, 3 months. He only was there 6 months. Well, similarly, at Delta, there are guys that are there very short period of time and guys that are there longer. And obviously the guys that are there longer, have a little bit different, thing. But like, what makes you a part of the tribe to where, now I can come to a former unit function and, feel the camaraderie. And what I was saying is that the Rangers do a better job of that than, say, Delta does.
What do you think that is? What gets you to be in the club, right? And again, I think you're doing a good job explaining it. It's like, just because you pass the course or graduate and you're officially stamped X, Y, or Z doesn't really mean you're accepted, right?
Yeah.
What do you think that is? Like, what gets you across the line?
I had, so when I got to the unit, my first squadron leadership was, I want to say, Pete Blaber. And he's written a lot of books, and people know him for what he is and what he's become. And he said he like kind of had this conversation with the new guys. And, we've been through selection and now been through the operator training course. And you really have to kind of perform to get through these things. And really what you realize, throughout the journey is like, you've never really accomplished anything. You still have to prove yourself. So just because you made it through whatever it is you're supposed to make it through, you're always having to perform and prove yourself. And he said, you guys are just getting here, and, there's one standard, and it's, performing, and it's this and that. And he said, you may see things that happen. Just realize that right now you've got 0 blue chips. And at some point in time, you'll have a bank of blue chips, and maybe that can help you. And I never really thought of it that way, but at some point in time, it's like, this guy is worth fighting for. This guy is worth saying, I've seen dudes that got DUIs, immediately left the building. I've seen guys that got DUIs that stuck around and got to stay in the building. Accidental discharge, something kind of totally different, but generally speaking. And so I always thought about that, like what point do you get to? Is, the blue chip bank full, or does it have enough blue chips that I can step on my crank a couple of times and survive versus guys that don't, And so I don't know what, like I said, maybe it's a key performance in a battle. Maybe it's, did well on something and, or was talking with the president and, made the president laugh and told, whatever it is. But there's something that happens at some point. I don't know if that's tangible.
Yeah. And you wonder is it personality based? Like, obviously you have to be able to perform, but like, there's like, I don't know. We got some guys that show up in the squadron who are just like weird dudes, and they're never going to be a part of it. And it's like, I remember one in particular, like he could build you a rocket and send you to the moon, but he couldn't tie his own shoes, like there's no common sense. He could go out there and start the jet and fly it, and he knew everything about the beeps and squeaks of it, but then he couldn't communicate to you. Like you couldn't make fun of him and then him make fun of you back. Is it like a personality based thing, you think, once you had the performance piece knocked out?
I think there's some of that. And, I've definitely had teammates that were brand new and got accepted. And just because like you jive. And I always said, at least for my team and the one that I served on the longest, I felt like I would rather have a guy that's 80% performer, but 100% compatibility. Like we can tweak some stuff and get the guy to where he needs to be with whatever thing we're doing. But if you can't get along, it doesn't matter if you're 100% performer. And I think the unit's very keen on that. At the end of the operator training course, it's almost like an NFL draft. And so you have it rotates which squadron gets first pick, and they look at first pick as like the guy that finished number 1 in the class. And even that, I don't know if there's a good, other than shooting events and things like that, and shooting and physical training, that's kind of where you rank. I know I finished my class as the top shooter. And so, that put me up on the pecking order, but there were guys that, outperformed me by far in a lot of other aspects that, maybe weren't the best shooters. And that's kind of the point, right? It's like we all have strengths and weaknesses, and as long as we're compatible and can get along, I think that goes a lot further than just being the number 1 performer. So it's, about being more well-balanced maybe. Yeah,
I'm super average, and I'm like middle of the road. And I think a lot of my success has come from just, I preach like the good dudette theory, because I get all these kids who ask like, hey, how do I do well at pilot training? Like I am definitely not that smart, and I definitely wasn't the smartest going through pilot training, but like I try to like help other people out. That's a big part of it, or a piece of it, right? Like you're going to fight as a team, and it starts there. Like you're the foundation, the building blocks. And so if you're just like me, like there are the guys who go to MIT, super brains, they show up there and they're going to cruise through because they could build the plane. But then again, like you don't want to go hang out and have a beer with them on Friday night, which probably then translates down the road when it's time to go fight. Like I don't want him off my wing. You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know. It's interesting to see those like dynamics play out because, yeah, they're people who are super smart, but again, I think like average. I don't know. I'm just trying to toot my own horn. I'm like, again, average and like,
Yeah. Guys are the best guys.
I'm like right here looking up like you guys are great. I'm just going to keep trucking along, just try to be a good dude and keep my head down low, you know?
What you want to do is just be
Average. You don't want to excel. You don't want to be number one. If you can be number one and a good dude, then you win. I can't do that, but some other people.
Anybody can be number one, but it takes a real guy to like be number 5.
Just, you need to fall middle of the road. That's my advice to you. Just kind of put in a mediocre effort and it's going to work out.
Yeah. I get a lot of, and this is one of the unintended consequences of the social media thing, kind of, people following and people seeing what we're doing with the band and everything else. But I get a lot of questions from guys, music stuff, but a lot of military questions too from young kids. And they always ask the same thing, like, what do I need to do to be, this? And I tell them the same thing, like, only one thing, and that's don't quit.
Yeah.
That's really all you have to do. And I'm a perfect example of, and I showed up, probably smoked weed the night before I went to MEPS, doing whatever, just like the total knucklehead, and had no idea, like nobody in my family was in the military. I got no G2 on, hey, here's some things that you should do or shouldn't do, nothing. And just flew by the seat of my pants the whole way through. And, realized also that the military is very much a crawl, walk, run organization, regardless of service. Nobody's throwing you into, hey, now all of a sudden you're just flying a plane straight out of, whatever your basic courses are. You're getting trained along the way, and then practical exercise. And now we're going to run after we've crawled and walked and everything else. So, in terms of advice, it's just really for me and the guys that ask about Ranger or Special Forces contracts, and going into special operations, it's, what can I do? Just show up and do everything that you're asked to do and don't quit.
Yeah, I think that's salient advice too, because again, like you said, crawl, walk, run, there's a syllabus and it's a building block approach. And you're not the first person to go through it and you're not the last person to go through it, but the military is pretty good at building people up into what they want them to go out there and do. I do always say, I'm like, be the best at whatever you're doing, right? I just happen to fall in the middle of the pack as the average, but you have to go be the best at it. Like, it's cliche to say, but be the best Ranger, be the best fighter pilot, whatever it is. And it's going to sort itself out and you're going to fall in that rack and stack. So,
yeah, when I talked to the recruiter initially, I told the recruiter I wanted to be in Delta, and he was, you can't do that. You got to be something first, like Special Forces. And I was like, okay, I'll do that. And he goes, well, you can't be that either. You got to be something before that, like a Ranger. And that's kind of how I started. I didn't necessarily expect for it to take 8 years to get to Delta, after joining. But also that was just my being naive and not really understanding, and there really not being a whole lot of information back in those days about anything. When I got to the Rangers, I realized, to your point, like, I just need to be the best that I could be today, because there is no going on from here if you're not a top performer here. So, each step of the way was kind of like, I've got to be a performer. And if I'm not, I'm never going to get there. So, even though that was a goal of mine, and that was one of the reasons that I joined the Army, it wasn't something that I didn't every day wake up and go, okay, what do I have to do today to get to Delta Force?
Right.
It was, I just need to perform. I need to go run. I need to hang on the run. I need to not get below a 280 on my PT test. I need to go, do this and whatever it might be. But yeah, very much to your point.
Yeah. Show up and win. Just be the best. It's pretty simple. That's it. That's all I got.
Or middle of the road.
Or middle of the road. I mean, you might land, again, you're landing in the middle of the road if you're like me. My best, just not that great. Good, not great.
My best and your best are two different things, Sarge.
Well, jumping back there. So you said, hey, to the recruiter, I want to be in Delta. You do have kind of how'd you end up going to the Army? What was the drive there? How'd you end up at the recruiter's office?
So I originally, there was a trifecta of three things are redundant. There was this series of events that happened, and maybe towards the end of 1989, and was playing music and working jobs and lifeguarding and stuff like that to kind of pay bills and whatnot. But I really wanted to, from the time I was little, I wanted to be a musician and pro musician and everything else. And I built a band and was trying to push that as hard as I could. And things even locally, I grew up DC area, and there were bands like Wrathchild that had elevated and gotten to Headbangers Ball and stuff like that. So like there definitely was a progression of things that could have happened that could have gotten us to that point. So in '89, three things happened. One, band just kind of fell apart, and I thought, okay, I can take another 3 years to build this thing and, try and get it to where it was. And where am I then? Now I'm at 23 years of age. I was 20 at the time. And I thought, okay, I can either rebuild and go that way. One of the other things that happened was a buddy of mine that had joined the Air Force, and he was like an EOD guy in the Air Force. He came home for probably Christmas vacation. And I talked to him, and he told me about, at the end of his basic training, there were these recruiters that showed up that were trying to recruit people into what I didn't know was probably STS and, Special Tactics Squadron, where these guys jump in behind enemy lines and rescue down pilots. And when he talked about that, it was kind of like, ooh, that kind of sounds cool.
Yeah.
And the third thing, let's see, what was it? So band, that, I'm trying to remember what the third thing was now. I'm having another TBI moment maybe. Anyway, these things kind of led me to go to the Air Force guy. And I went to the Air Force recruiter only because, my buddy, said, hey, this is what I did. So I went to the Air Force recruiter and actually joined the Air Force.
Yeah.
And the Air Force recruiter 100% lied to me and said, because he said, what do you want to do? And I said, well, my buddy told me about these guys that jump in behind enemy lines to rescue down pilots. And I thought, okay, well, that would be cool to do. So he says, I can get you a contract for that. You just got to sign first, and then I'll get you a contract. And so over a period of about a month, I kept leaving his office, and he would say, finally the Army guy pulls me aside and he goes, hey man, what's going on? I see you here. Like, what kind of bullshit is that guy telling you? And I said, I don't really know, but he's telling me he can give me a contract, but I've not gotten any contract, and I'm worried I'm going to be in basic training and they go, oh, you're going to be a cook, and I get sent to Alaska to go be a cook or something. Like, I don't know how this works. And he's like, well, what do you want to do? And that's what opened the whole can of worms. And I said, well, something like Delta Force.
Can I do that? Yeah. That sounds great.
You got a program for that?
I'm ready for it.
Yeah.
So just that simple, the recruiter lying to you. How fast was it from meeting that Army recruiter to when you were showing up to basic training?
So the Army recruiter had to, because I had signed, drove me to Andrews Air Force Base, and I had to get some full bird colonel at Andrews Air Force Base to negate my contract.
Yeah.
I signed on the dotted line, and it was a big deal. He's like, you can't tell anybody that I drove you. And, he's sneaking up into the parking lot, and I jump out of his car and go in, and this colonel is screaming at me, you're making the worst mistake ever. And, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, whatever, dude, just, sign my paper so I can get out of your hair. And anyway, so that's how I got into the Army. So then I was able to, sign with the Army. But at that time, pre-war, it was, I think, a 9-month wait for me to go to basic training. So it was a delayed enlistment thing where I didn't pick that. That was literally, it took all that time before, maybe it was drawdowns or whatever was happening at the time. I don't remember, but yeah.
That Gulf War, where are we in that timeline?
Oh, the other thing, so the three things that happened, the Rangers jumped into Panama, December of 1989.
Okay.
And was at a bandmate's house. And was watching what little bit of that was going on CNN. And so there was some kind of like live footage and things like that. That was kind of like, man, it really kind of stimulated the excitement, meter in me. And anyway, so those were the three things.
But you grew up, there's no military family, no military background. It's purely, hey, I'm playing music. I like music. I'm going to be a musician. Band falls apart. You see Panama happening. And then, hey, I'm off to the recruiter.
Yeah, basically.
Man.
In a nutshell. And interestingly, my bandmate Jason had a similar experience. He played in Nirvana and then had a falling out with those guys and jumped in and toured for a year with Soundgarden on their first world tour, and kind of had this unfulfilled moment. And Mogadishu happened, and so that was the impetus for him going and joining the Army, and went right to the recruiter and was like, "I want to be a Ranger."
Man, and now you guys bandmates or like time or meeting up too. That's kind of wild and serendipitous. The fact that was a catalyst for him, and then you guys are playing together now.
Yeah, totally.
Man, it's interesting. I do recruiting for the Air Force on the reserve side of the house. It's big. There's lots of issues going on. Like period. We won't get into those. But now this year is the first time that someone could have started their career after 9/11. Gone through 20 years of continuous combat operations and retired. But I know when I was doing air shows, going back and you're talking to kids and stuff like that, it kind of got surreal when you're like showing up to high school and kids were born after 9/11. Because for me, 9/11 was a big catalyst. I flew my first flight on September 10th, 2001, and like next day, boom, like I want to get into it. Sounds like you with Panama, there was a catalyst, right? And there's going to be another catalyst at some point. But it's interesting to see the dynamics now of people, and I don't know, it's always cyclical, right? Now we're just living it, but it's interesting the dynamics now and trying to get people to go out there and join and serve the military. Yeah.
It's I talk a lot about, when people ask about Mogadishu, you almost have to preface it with, you have to understand there was no war, there was no budget, there was no super huge training budget. There was, you got what you got and you kind of dealt with what you had. And it was a completely different military. And what made you a good soldier back in those days was, you could run and do PT and you had your uniform was squared away and stuff like that. And, there was a lot more to it, obviously, I'm generalizing. But, those were the things that were important at the time, discipline, and the eyelets on your boots had to be blackened, not silver, and all that kind of stuff. Completely different mind frame.
Right. There's so much, I guess, and put it lightly, free time, right, to worry about frivolous stuff, right? Because you're not worried about combat and training and deploying. So I'm thinking, I'm just trying to paint the picture in my mind for the timeline. You join in 90, right? So Panama happens, Gulf War is happening probably as you're going through training or somewhere in that timeline. Everything is drawing down, and then you go through training, and then you go right to Ranger School out of basic training or pretty close to it.
So you go, generally speaking, I signed up infantry, but you could be, I think there are like 5 different MOSs that can serve within the Rangers. So you have like communicators and medics and probably supply and, folks like that. But so I was an infantry guy. I went to basic training starting in November of 90.
Okay.
And so did basic training for 8 weeks. And then AIT infantry stuff, they called it OSIT. It was like one station unit training. So did basic training, AIT infantry stuff, then went to airborne school, then went through what was a 3-week Ranger indoctrination program, RIP. Now it's like an 8-week long RASP, Ranger Assessment Selection Phase, something like that program, maybe.
Yeah.
And then you get assigned to a Ranger battalion. And once you're in the Ranger battalion, you kind of have to prove yourself. And it's a requirement to have a Ranger tab to be in a leadership position. So, generally between like a year and 18 months as a private to maybe PFC, E3 or something like that, you're just proving yourself every day. And once you've proven yourself long enough, then you get a slot to Ranger School. you automatically promote to E4 when you get your Ranger tab, and now you're like a team leader.
Okay.
And at least, are slotted to take over a team within a squad, within a platoon. That's kind of the way it rolls. So I fortunately and unfortunately got selected way ahead of folks because I was the only one that passed like the PT test in my platoon. So I think I was in the Rangers for 5 months or so and went to Ranger school. And it bit me in the ass because I had leaders that had left my platoon and went to the Ranger training brigade that were running Ranger school. And they were like, what the fuck are you doing here? Like, you just got there. And so they put me on the extended course, and I think I ended up doing 7 phases of Ranger school instead of 4. And it was an ass kicker. But anyway, that was kind of like the normal progression, at least how things went back then.
Going through Ranger school,
still pretty similar.
Yeah, but like if going through Ranger school, if you don't have to wash back for a phase, how long is that start to finish?
When I went, it was 72 days, and it was 4 phases. They've gotten rid of one of the phases, so I would imagine it's probably like 65 days, something like that now.
And if you wash back and have to repeat a phase, how long did that extend you doing the seven rounds?
Yeah, so instead of it being like 3 months long, it was, about 5.5 months long.
Dude. And talk about having to show up every day, right? And be the best every single day just to get through it. Hearing guys talk about it, like it just sounds like soul crushing. So how, like when you go back and have to redo a phase, what were you telling yourself to get through that? Was it just like day by day, or what got you through having to repeat that?
I think it was day by day. Really, my first time through was, kind of getting set up by these leaders, and they just kind of put me in a position where I was just getting fucked every time I did anything.
Yeah.
And now my peers, they all know that I'm like damaged goods. And so it was like, we're not going to help that guy, that was just kind of the situation. And like, as an E2, I didn't understand about like how to march a company of guys from here to there. Like, maybe I had done some drill and ceremony, but it's not like, and they were playing games with me. Like, one of the things that you can have happen to you during Ranger school is like you do something wrong and they'll give you a major minus spot report. Like, you did this and you were talking in line, you're getting a major minus, right? And I think you get 2 of those, you like repeat, they'll recycle you. If you get 2 or 3, I forget what it was. Anyway, they were just fucking with me. I didn't know that they were just fucking with me, but in one day I signed 18 major minus spot reports because my company, some of the individuals didn't have their cat eyes sewn onto their rucksacks properly. So every example of, hey, First Sergeant, that's the cat eyes are crooked, major minus. Hey, First Sergeant, this is something such, major minus. And it was just like, it got in my head. I thought, okay, well, I didn't know that they were just screwing with me.
I'm done.
But anyway, that happened. So they made me the company First Sergeant, and I'm E2. And one of the other things that they did was, hey, First Sergeant, we need 5 guys to stay back from Christmas break to do details around the company area. So pick 5 guys. And I was like, I can't pick 5 people, like, you want me to bring. So I go, okay, well, I'll be one of them. And they made me pick 4 names out of a stack of lead forms. And then they didn't say anything to me. Dude just walks right outside and he goes, your First Sergeant picked you to stay back from Christmas break. Let me see so-and-so's. And it was all bullshit. Like, they didn't actually need it, but it was just setting me up. Yeah. And anyway, so that was one of the fun things that I got to deal with. In addition to just trying to, like, I'm just trying to be the gray man. You're trying to slip through the cracks. It was like not happening, but anyway.
Yeah, it's good to be the lightning rod every now and then, right?
Yeah.
Like, you just got to keep trucking because they're just messing with you, and that's like every training program you go through, people are messing with you. which I don't know. It's part of it. It's part of the haze, and they want to see you react.
Yeah, no doubt. And that was, it was a no-win situation. And I didn't realize that it was just fun and games. I was like, okay, well, obviously I'm recycling because I've got 18 major minus spot reports in one afternoon. So, I guess I know what that means. And then I go on to the next phase, like, whoa, okay, that's crazy. Like, what happened to all these spot reports? And then I get to the next phase. But at that point, it's like they had made such an example of me that, I had a couple guys walk off in the middle of the desert, and, I was in charge of the patrol, even though we were two separate units. This guy walked off in the middle of the desert and, was lost for 6 hours or something like that. And of course that was my patrol. So I got a no-go for the patrol, and, it just kind of compounds.
But you got through it, just day by day, keep pushing through it.
Yeah. Yeah. Never quit. Don't quit. That's all you got to do.
Yeah. Show up. Don't
Middle
quit.
Road, number 5.
Be your best, be average. Mediocrity. Getting through Ranger school. So you graduate, now you're a Ranger, and then you're probably in the unit with your tab for about a year or so before Mogadishu kicks off. Am I guessing that right?
That was I finished Ranger school in late 92 and somewhere in there. And about a year before Mogadishu kicks off. And interestingly, we kind of got groomed right away to be a leader, and they'll send you to other schools. Like I went to Jumpmaster school, and I went to, whatever it might be, SEER school. I think I went then. And I told my chain of command that I wanted to be in the recon detachment. So at the time there was this, not secret, but it was a very small detachment of Rangers in the regiment that could, go to Halo school and be scuba guys. And they were supposed to be kind of the scouts and, recon for the Ranger regiment. And I told my leadership that I wanted to go there. So as soon as I mentioned that, like all of my, not fast tracking, but, geared up to be a leader, the next squad leader or whatever, they kind of pulled me off of that. And so I just kind of was in a pause, was supposed to go to selection for this recon detachment in October of 93. So when we deployed to our training exercise pre-Mogadishu in Texas, in Fort Bliss, I was just kind of like an extra gunner, extra gun on my team. I wasn't really in charge of anybody, but, had obviously proven myself, and they knew they could trust me and things like that. So I was, just kind of freelancing.
And then, you're still a young guy, but you said like once you get your tab, was there anything like, hey, you got kind of haze going through being the young guy because you went so early. But once you graduated, did you have to deal with any of that anymore?
Pretty much stopped. So in the Ranger regiment, we could call it, HIPACA training and make that as a cover word for hazing people or whatever it might be. But, there was a significant amount of that. And I think once as a leader later, once you kind of recognize that like this guy isn't going to quit and he physically can hang, he's trainable, that kind of stops. And there might be some, random acts of cruelty and things like that happen. And, but generally speaking, like once you've come back from Ranger school, they're grooming you to be a leader, a team leader, and then squad leader, and move up the chain. And a lot of that stops. You're still military bearing and all of that stuff with, subordinates and above you. But generally speaking, it's chill at that point.
Gotcha. So, but still, you show up, you're a trusted gun, you're a trusted dude, and then you guys are out the door. What was the kind of lead up to Mogadishu when you guys, did you guys know what you're rolling into, or was it, hey, this kicked off, hop on the plane and go? What was it like then?
So we were at a JRX, which was a joint readiness exercise, and that was something that like all the units within, SOCOM are kind of working together the way that they would work if something real were to happen. So we were actually doing like a 2-week, it may have been less, I don't remember, but it was about a 2-week training of exercise in Fort Bliss, Texas. And kind of in the middle of that, we got called into our leadership's, tent, wherever it might be. And hey, there's this thing going on in a place called Mogadishu, and the UN and the US is providing aid to these starving Somalis through the UN. And there's warlords that are, starting problems and killing people and stealing the aid, whatever that might be. And the president wants to stop that. And that was kind of all we heard. And then it was like, okay, maybe it's going to happen. Go back and do your training thing. And maybe a day later, we get called back in. And it was kind of like, hey, we think this is going to happen. We're going to be going to Fort Bragg to do a training, cycle with the guys that we're going to go over there and do this with. So, we'll keep you in the loop. Until then, just go back and do your training stuff. And I think within a day, we were on a plane to Fort Bragg and went and did about a 10-day train up prior to what would be us going over.
Okay.
We finished our train up, and my platoon, as an example, had one mission during the train up, and then it got switched last minute. But anyway, the president's not ready to do this yet, so get back on the plane and go back to the training exercise in Fort Bliss, Texas, and finish that up. We land in Texas, and another American UN worker had been killed, and he said, okay, president's ready to execute. So get back on the plane, go back to Fort Bragg. True story. And I think we slept on the tarmac in Fort Bliss, Texas for like 4 hours or something while they refueled the plane and swapped the crew. And then we got back on the plane and went back to Fort Bragg. So we were there for a handful of days. We got some uniforms, like desert uniforms and desert helmet covers and desert boots and maybe plus up. I think we were allowed to use the PX, but it was like, you can't call home. This is totally, there's no, pay phones, anything like that to get on. And next thing you know, we're on a C5 loaded up, a couple different shocks of C5s, and we land in Mogadishu.
That's wild. What was anything set up when you guys landed in Mogadishu, or is it no kidding, like establish the base, establish the airfield?
Yeah, there were definitely things there. So we didn't know what we were getting into. I don't remember hearing anything about like, oh, there are other UN forces on the airfield and we're going to be staying at the airfield. Like, I don't remember any of that. I just remember it being kind of like, yeah, we're going to land, we're going to stay in this hangar on the maybe that. I don't even know. I don't remember any of that. But we land, and I think we were all thinking like, are we going to have to like low crawl, individual movement techniques off the plane? Like, are we going to get shot at, or what? What's going to happen? And anyway, we get there, and it was kind of like the welcoming committee, and they had our living spaces kind of already identified, and all of that stuff. I almost immediately got, hey, Thomas, take the private and go. There's a hole in the fence back there or in the wall, and don't let anybody in here. And so I think that was kind of like, hey, we need to establish a security perimeter around this thing. So they strung up concertina wire, and that was like a little gate coming off the airfield, so people couldn't just get into our living environment. We had a huge connex, and you can see it in pictures now, but they had connexes in front of the hangar door, kind of this, so they couldn't just shoot RPGs right into the front door of the hangar. And so like the sandbags aren't going to fill themselves, so we need to fill this connex full of sandbags and to keep it as like a barricade so that they couldn't either drive something in there or shoot stuff in there. So we were doing things like that. So it was just about dark, and I take this private up to the hole in the fence, and the first thing that happens is a guy, and I knew this now, I didn't necessarily know it then, but was probably one of the Russian doctors. And, again, not really understanding who is on this compound with us, and this guy comes up and he starts talking to me, and I'm like, hey, get the fuck out of here. Yeah. That kind of thing. Like, I don't know who you are, but, you're not coming through the hole in the wall. So we had our guns with us, and that was it. And boom, mortar round hits a building maybe 50 feet away from me and hits the roof of it, and there's just like sparks go everywhere. And I think I had a radio, and I'm like, yo, can we get our gear out here? You know, like we don't have vests or helmets or any of that stuff. And at some point they probably ran a private with our gear, you know, once he got all of his stuff on, ran our stuff out to us. But it's kind of sat there exposed and, you know, up against the wall while the mortar rounds kept coming.
The perfect DFP, just out in the open with.
Yeah, we weren't there very long, and you know, mortar rounds were already coming into the compound.
Did you guys have a lot of IDF that was rolling into the base while you guys were there, or is that just kind of the initial welcoming committee from the locals?
Yeah, I think that was just kind of, you know, them taking some pot shots, and all the mortar rounds that happened after that were kind of, you know, out and about. I think my platoon ended up standing under some like cement awning or something. We were totally covered, so it wasn't a big deal. And I think at that point they recognized, like, don't sit out there next to the hole, like you're going to get hit by something. So we went under this cover, and me and my homie light up a cigarette, and we're sitting there smoking. And my platoon sergeant, who smokes also, comes over and he's like, "Put that out! They're going to see that!" You know, like, dude, we're behind a wall. Like, there's no way they're going to see our cigarette. But we're doing push-ups because we were smoking, and as other mortar rounds are hitting. True story.
Oh, that sounds like shenanigans, like the reflective belt, you know, police that go around nowadays. Just like lose their mind if you're not wearing your reflective belt. You're like, do you know where we are? Like, you've lost your minds. Was the Russian doctor, was he just using that hole as like his way on and off base? Is that how he got around?
They had a bunch of trailers on the other side of this wall. So you had the hangar, and all of that was on one side of the wall. On the other side of the wall, there were all these trailers, and we didn't know it. You know, again, I don't think that I got a briefing that said, "Hey, there's a bunch of medical staff over there," but that was their whole area. So you had like Swedish nurses and
rough
that like to sunbathe, and you had them over there. And I think there was a Russian medical crew and people like that. But it was just more or less, we don't want people, you know, coming through. This isn't a place for them to come hang out. We've got demolitions, we've got helicopters sitting there. There's all kinds of stuff, and we don't want people anywhere near it. So don't let anybody through. That was kind of the thing.
Life's all about timing. Probably that mortar round had hit earlier and he came cruising through there. Imagine his life might have been shorter.
Yeah.
Let's make it sporty. So when you guys, you know, I know like obviously Black Hawk Down, it highlights that battle and sounds like it's pretty accurate, but you were doing more, and it wasn't just that one battle. Like day in and day out, you guys are going out there and doing raids, trying to capture some of these bad dudes. Can you kind of walk me through what was the lead up to the battle, right? Because that kind of ended things, but the whole time you guys were there, you're busy doing things, right?
Yeah, pretty much. And we did a lot of training stuff too. So even if we didn't have a mission geared up for that day, and you could kind of guess the flow of things based on what was happening. And some of it I can't really talk about just because of assets that were being used to, you know, locate people and things like that. But you could kind of tell like activity was low or activity was high. And if it was high activity, you know, maybe we're going to end up doing something today. If not, you know, we would come up with some sort of training regime of some sort to go do, you know, something, not be static.
Yeah.
I think we did 7 total missions, and that was from really didn't start until maybe something late August. And we got there the 22nd. I remember getting in a gunfight on Labor Day. I think it was the actual Labor Day. It may have been after midnight on Labor Day, you know, Sunday evening or whatever. But similarly, we were going after some lieutenant, you know, one of these warlord people, and we had a vehicle blocking position set up at this one major intersection, and we could see helos coming in and out of the target area, and we were kind of the outer perimeter security for them. And we could see guys leaving the target, so we know kind of it's over, and you know we're getting ready to wrap up. And about that time, you know, massive gunfire erupts right behind us, like maybe 60, 75 feet behind us. And we were next to a stadium, not the same stadium that was depicted in the movie. That was a different stadium, but we were next to a stadium where Aidid, Mohammed Farah Aidid, who was the main warlord in Mogadishu at that time, and that's the head guy that we were after in total. But I think he used to give a lot of his speeches from this stadium. So if you look up Aidid and speeches and things like that, I think you'll see the stadium that I'm talking about. Anyway, a bunch of bad guys got behind a wall, and there were like lattice work cinder blocks in this wall. And so they stuffed their guns through there and some RPGs and stuff like that. And they could fire at us, but they couldn't traverse because of the holes in the cinder blocks. They could only do so much. And we whipped around, and I think, every gun that could have shot was shooting. It was just this amazing exchange of gunfire for, the better part of like a minute and a half or so. And miraculously, one of the first things I did when the gunfire stopped was like took my hands and started feeling everything and looking at my hands because I'm standing literally in the middle of the street about 30 feet away, and there's just lead flying everywhere. And I thought, surely I'm hit. And about the same time, I thought my ears aren't ringing. That's totally weird. And I think just the adrenaline like just pushed that ear ringing right out. I just never noticed my ears ringing. But anyway, that was something that happened early on. Every kind of subsequent raid that we did, whether it was daytime being way worse than nighttime, but everything that we did, you could kind of feel the tension building, in the city. It just seemed, it was never a friendly place. I also don't think that at the time that we got there, I don't think that you would have been beheaded and drugged through the streets. You know what I mean? It would have been like, oh, it's America, whatever. I don't think it was at that level. So at some point, anyway, you could kind of feel the tension building. And those are the things I wish, I think Black Hawk Down did a good job of conveying the overall, here's what happened. Obviously there was a huge, you can't have a movie with 120 characters. So, we're making a lot of these events happen to one or two characters and things like that. But I think it's fairly accurate in how things happened, the timeline of how stuff, where things were, when this happened, this was going on here. I think it did a pretty good job of that.
Yeah, I can't even imagine. Well, was there a reason doing daytime raids and not doing all nighttime raids, or is it?
I think it was just we know where somebody is, and we can't, take a chance on losing, where this guy might be.
Gotcha.
I think that's what drove the train. I mean, generally speaking, right, we like to do everything at night because you have a little bit more of an advantage. Set the conditions, but there are times, many times, when you've got to go and you got to go. I can tell you there was never any speech by any of my leadership saying, hey guys, we're going into a really bad area of town today. To me, it was just like every other mission. I think the last daylight thing that we did prior to October 3rd, which was when the whole Black Hawk Down thing happened, October 3rd and 4th. There were some random, like maybe mortar or RPG fired at us, some sporadic gunfire, but it was nothing significant. And I think one of the things that I learned, and I don't think a lot of people know this, but that was really America's first engagement with Al Qaeda.
Yeah.
And we had been given intel that day, October 3rd, that there were like 300 Kenyan militia that had just showed up into town. And it didn't mean anything to us at the time. Like, I don't know, what does that mean? It's like guys with guns? Are they soldiers? Like, I don't know. But looking back on it now, it's like those were definitely AQ guys.
Man, that's incredible. And you think about it, and then your entire career, you're basically dealing with those guys and
AQ guys.
Yeah, it's like that was the start of it.
Yeah, they're like a mosquito that just continually bites America,
The gnats just won't go away.
Yeah.
So back up just real quick though. So you're telling me the general didn't come out to the helicopters and the Humvees and tell everyone like good luck and thumbs up, be safe?
I was talking with so I was down at Ranger Rendezvous a couple of weeks ago, and one of the guys that was there also, his name is John Bellman, and he's also one of the guys getting upgraded to a Silver Star, which is awesome. He was on the search and rescue bird.
Okay.
So their whole function was just like literally fly around, and if there was some incident, they can go and reinforce and back up or rescue, if a helicopter gets shot down, whatever, like they have the equipment to do that. And he told me, because I said the same thing, I was like, I didn't know. Nobody ever said you guys are going into like the really hot spot. Nobody told us. And he goes, yeah, we heard that. And that's kind of also the point is like people will generalize, oh, I saw this in the movie, which means it's true. And it's like, doesn't mean that that rule applies across the board.
Yeah.
And, I think when I think back to that, I think one of the last podcasts I did, somebody asked me like, what was the big takeaway? What was the big learning lesson? And I think for me, it would be this. Delta Force, no doubt, is one of the best in the world because it plans and practices and rehearses contingencies. And one of the things that I know happened, specifically to my part of the mission that day was we really had no means to be able to communicate. Like, we can't stand in the middle of the street and, as a leader, explain to you why we're going and doing this or what we're doing next. And there was no place to do that. We also had no contingency plan for that. And so it wasn't something that we understood at the time, but, again, peacetime Army, not everybody had Peltors. Nobody had Peltors. Nobody in my unit had a radio, other than a radio that was on the vehicle. So the only time you had any idea, and oh, by the way, there's so much gunfire and explosions and things like that you couldn't hear the radio anyway. So the flow of information was pretty much zero until a couple of times when we were either back at the hangar or times when there was a lull in gunfire and we can communicate and things like that. But it was very chaotic. And that's just something that I think you could watch the movie and you see all these things happening, but just understand that like, I had no idea what I was doing for large portions of the battle. Just shooting people. Like I can just shoot people and that's what I can do. So I don't know why, I don't know where I'm going next, or I see my vehicle left me and I need to go down the street about 300 meters myself to link up with my vehicle. And I did, you know what I mean? It's like, I don't even know what's going on. And when we're together, I'm just like looking for a place to go shoot people.
Once it kicked off, I mean, that's a great point. Like once it kicked off, what was the objective? Like, was it just to survive and get to the next point? Like who was guiding the fight? I mean,
who knows?
Jeez.
Yeah, that was the weirdest part of all. It's like once that thing kind of started, it wasn't until we were back at the hangar and it's like, oh, okay, here's what we just did. I didn't know what we just did. Then it was like, oh, there's some Blackhawks that got shot down. We need to go rescue those guys. So we're going to go drive back out and do that. Okay, but once we were out there, if the plan started to change, that didn't get disseminated to anybody, other than the people that knew that maybe had communications with what was going on. But
if that happened,
it was just kind of like, I'm just going with the flow here,
If that happened today, how do you think it would be different, or do you think it would be different?
I would say definitely different, just insofar that every guy on the ground now has a radio, and you may even have more than a radio as a means to communicate and be able to see things that, we couldn't even see back then through devices that exist and things like that. So, I don't think that it would ever be the same, and I know things that I did later in other theaters, it was much different. And I've been in many engagements and gunfights other than Mogadishu, and I never felt the way that I felt then. even when things got kind of hairy. I never felt in any of the engagements that I was in other theaters, I never felt like I felt in Mogadishu.
What did you feel like in Mogadishu?
I mean, it was just live,
Yeah.
Kill or be killed, and no one's going to come out of this alive. Like, I don't know how we do this without everybody dying.
Was that early on in the battle? Because it was a long, long day.
Yeah, I think pretty quickly. So for me personally, I didn't even understand, as an example, the first time I started engaging people, we weren't even at the target building. So I didn't even understand that we were fighting our way to the target building. And I thought we're in the place we're supposed to be, and it may not really look that way, but there's already gunfire happening and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And one of the first things that I did was I yelled over to my buddy, one of the guys that was killed, Don Pilla. And I yelled at him, "What are they shooting? 22s?" And he probably couldn't hear what I said, but he looked at me and smiled, and we had this moment in the street. And I didn't realize that I was hearing the crack of the bullet, not the report of the weapon. But because of training being so different and peacetime military and not having the same kind of training, I didn't even understand that I was hearing the crack of the bullet. And it wasn't until I saw pieces of wall and sidewalk and things that were right near me that I pieced together that, okay, this is bullets being shot at us. And that happened very quickly. It wasn't, minutes of trying to determine what was going on, but it was in that, okay, I'm out. I'm trying to find a place to get cover. I'm trying to return fire, and I'm not understanding what's going on. Okay, now I see what's going on, and now I can start engaging. It wasn't until I saw him kill that the switch got flipped from confusion, being scared to death, to anger. And I mean, fury of, man, you hurt one of us, you are going to pay the price. And, that wasn't too long into the battle, but there was still that kind of overwhelming fear, there's no way we're going to live through this. And also it was just a constant reaction. I didn't really have a lot of time to think.
Yeah.
It was more oh, there's dudes with an RPG. Start shooting. Oh, this is going on. This vehicle just got hit with an RPG. This dude's in the street. There was just stuff happening everywhere. So it was sensory overload. It was, all that kind of happening. It wasn't until I saw the first guy get hit, and it was all right, this is game on. No, I just feel lucky to have lived through it, experienced it, all of that, and so much of anything is timing, right? It comes down to right place, right time, wrong place, wrong time, whatever
100%.
It might be. And it was the first thing that, in the military that I saw that was kind of with all the metal that was flying through the air. And I mean, a lot of metal. I think that there were they counted over 900 RPG explosions. I mean, just to give you an idea of the scope of how big something was. Just with the amount of stuff that was flying around, the fact that more guys lived than what, did, the fact that, there were 70 out of the Rangers. And I think the Rangers probably had 100 guys on the ground that day. I think there were 77 Purple Hearts.
Jeez.
Maybe 115 Rangers, something like that. So, the fact of all the stuff that was flying around that, could have hit, and it kind of solidified something in my mind, which is when it's your time, it's your time. And sure, you can make mistakes that leave you exposed or, whatever it might be, you can, but yeah, there's just such a randomness to it,
Yeah, no doubt. And the fact too, that you guys are relatively limited base ops as far as what the support assets are there. And you have that many wounded and that many guys lived on the back end of it versus, later wars where, I think guys and gals will attest, Afghanistan, Iraq, the medical facilities, the ability to get people to level 1 trauma centers and get them the treatment and save their lives is far better today than it was probably in 1993.
Yeah, I think that, and I know that there were, not that there were guys that died that could have lived. I wouldn't suggest that because that might, I think that's an unfair statement. Yeah, 100% to your point. I think that they also were trying to triage stuff because it was so overwhelming. This guy might be so far along that we can't afford to take the time because then we're not going to be able to work on 5 guys that are sustained, whatever it might be. So I think that, and also at that time, like, nobody had lived with that, right? Nobody, because it was a peacetime military, it's like they were experiencing that for the first time too,
Yeah.
Like, here's a guy that gets wheeled in that has a hand in his cargo pocket, and it's not even his hand, like, whose hand is this? Where does it belong? That kind of stuff. Like, they were dealing with it too,
Yeah, unimaginable. Now, that experience, I know you said from day one you want to be Delta. Obviously, going through that, living through that, you're still on the path to become a Delta guy. So that didn't change, obviously, with that battle.
No, I think also one of the things that it did, is I got to see those guys in action, number one.
Yeah.
I got to see how they were equipped. I got to see that they did things in a very smart way. And that was one of my big frustrations with, the Rangers in general. And I don't want to say anything that would talk down the Rangers. It's a different level of thing, but it's, doing something as smart as you can possibly do it versus, again, not having contingencies, not having some of these things like backup plans and things like that. And if I'm guilty of anything, being in the military that I was bad at, it would be probably that I would overthink things. And maybe I was thinking about things that my leaders weren't thinking about. And maybe that would cause doubt in, what I'm being asked to do because I'm thinking of something a little bit further down the road than they're thinking of. And I noticed I had that regardless of where I was in the military. I had a little bit of that going on. And sometimes you're like, well, wait, we could do this and it would be a much better way of doing it, So anyway, yeah, if anything, it solidified that that's where I want to be because I think these guys are doing things in a way that are much smarter than just like march into fire,
Right.
That's a completely different animal.
Well, I'm sure you can test, like, it's a numbers game. Rangers, you're dealing with a lot more bodies, kind of bigger bureaucracy, for lack of a better phrase to put along with it. But Delta, a smaller team, and to your point, aren't you kind of encouraged to question and ask and think outside the box? And even though if you're the boss and you say something, like, it's my responsibility to at least highlight or bring up things that maybe you are not aware about that would affect your decision making.
I think that there are tactful ways of doing that in organizations. Delta prides itself on being a bottoms-up organization, meaning it doesn't matter how new of a guy you are. If you can think of a way of doing something that's a smart way of doing something and you can rehearse it and kind of vet it and everything else, like, it can happen. Nothing there is happening like, here's what you men are going to go do. And this is, it's very much a team leader, team figuring out how we want to, crack the nut. And that was something that it wasn't bad about the Rangers. It was something that I think I had read a handful of like Rangers in Vietnam books and things like that. And I was expecting it to be more of like that small team, this is what we go do, and we sneak around, like, blow this up, and now we're going to shoot these guys or whatever. And it wasn't like that, and that's okay. It was just different than what I thought it was going to be. And so it really wasn't until I got to Delta that I felt like, hey, here's that thing that I thought it was going to be.
Yeah.
This is kind of what it's about, and I enjoy that a lot more for sure.
And you said you went through selection for Delta in 99. Did I use that term correctly? Selection?
Yeah, fall of 1998.
Okay, 98. And then a couple of years, and then 9/11 kicks off. I imagine the years of Delta pre 9/11 are much different than after 9/11. Is that a true statement?
Yeah, and just like everywhere, they've got a great budget and a great training program and incredible facilities and everything else. So in terms of that, it still was geared up to go do. I think the difference being is that Delta is always going to be ready to go do whatever it might need to do, and its bread and butter mission is the hostage rescue piece and things like that. So it's constantly honing the tip of the spear. It's constantly doing that, whether there's war or no war. And if there's anything going on, it will definitely be involved, So if you're in the 10th Mountain Division, just because there's something happening in the Army doesn't mean that you're getting, assigned there to go do something. But definitely in the unit, you're going to be going to wherever there is something going on, no matter what. So it was different then still. And the guys that were legends in the building, were legends for different reasons. Yeah. I had the fortune of, even in my training class, a bunch of the guys that were instructors, and when I got to the unit, a bunch of guys that were from Mogadishu were still there. So, it was pretty cool to see, like, hey, I remember you from, this one incident, or something, whether it be, hanging out in the hangar or whatever it might be. But now I'm on the same team or in the same troop as one of the guys that was there. And, that was pretty awesome.
Yeah, I guess serendipitous, kind of same deal with Mogadishu and time back to the band. And, I guess it's small world, it's circular, and you always have these ties and these connections. It's like the 6 degrees of separation, right? Or 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon.
We had this one instructor that would, it was Chris Ferris, who ended up becoming the SOCOM Sergeant Major. I think that was his last position before he retired out of the military. But he was one of the instructors and later became like my troop Sergeant Major. And I worked with him a good deal. And then our squadron Sergeant Major, and then the unit Sergeant Major. So I worked with him for a long time. When I was in OTC and he was one of the instructors, he would make a point, because not all of the instructors had been to combat. And that's kind of weird to think about, now that we've, just spent 20 years at war. But he would make a point, and then he would say, yeah, like, just ask Brad. He knows, right? Am I right? And I'm like, wait, I'm not an instructor. I'm just trying to go through the course and be successful. And, but, and that kind of, at the time, like, there weren't a whole lot of other guys that had combat infantry badges and things like that I went through the course with. It just wasn't like that. So, that was interesting in itself.
I imagine, because my experience with that is it comes down right place, right time, as you mentioned. Like, some people are going to do an entire career and not, go to war or do what they, join. Like, I think there is a drive for people who want to get into the action and do it, but you might not it might be wrong timing. And I've had buddies who just wrong timing. They show up as a squadron, just leaves. They sit at home. Squadron comes back. By the time it's time for that squadron to cycle back in, it's time for them to move, and they just never get to get there. And so again, I think it does come down to right time, right place, and you just never know if it's going to happen. One example is like the F-22 community. They just recently, like in the past 5 years, got to drop bombs in the F-22, which is a whole other thing in itself of why we have a 5th gen fighter dropping bombs in a place that doesn't have air threats or advanced SAMs. But neither here nor there, those guys, so up until then, they haven't done anything. And I remember going to these massive exercises, and as a F-16 guy, your radar sucks and you're working your ass off trying to get a radar lock. And when you come back and you're doing a shot valve looking at stuff, the Raptor guys have global SA, everyone's talking, they see everything that's going on. And for young wingmen in the Raptor, they have an iPhone and everyone else has a Nokia flip phone, and they're playing Snake, just trying to make it happen. And these
Nokia flip phone with Snake.
Yeah,
that's a great reference.
Yeah, throwback for anyone who has that. Different plane, different fight. They're going to be the superstars. But it comes down to it is just because you have this technology, or you haven't, I guess, earned your combat stripes, whatever it is, like, you're still very capable, you're very well trained. And it's just the government hasn't pulled your tool off the the shelf yet to use it in some aspect.
Yeah.
What the lead into transition, global war, or terrorism? Being at Delta, what was your initial foray into the global war on terrorism? Where'd you end up? Or I guess what can you say? What were those initial couple of years like?
Interestingly, I first went to Afghanistan, so very early on, and after September 11th, obviously we knew we were going to be called to go do something, and it's anybody's guess. What are we going to do? What are we, what's our mission? What's our role? That type of thing. And the only thing I would really, care to share would be going to Afghanistan thinking that it was going to be war. And it was, kind of that thing that you brought up earlier. It's like, oh, hey, guys were running on the main road with no reflector belt and, what's going on here? We can't do this tonight because there's too much illumination. And, there was a lot of that stuff. And I just remember never thinking like we're at war. It didn't ever feel that way. And I don't, without getting specific, I don't know if the role, like what the role was. It just kind of didn't make sense. I was a part of the invasion into Iraq and a part of a whole bunch of other stuff that happened there. And from word go, it was like, this is war. And it was very clear, that, okay, we're not fiddle fucking around here. Like, we mean business. And that was really, if you ask me, like, what are the main takeaways? This was kind of like, I don't know, a finger drill of sorts. And this was like, okay, game on. Like, we mean business.
It seems it follows these cycles. Because I know hearing other guys talk about it or reading about it, there are different periods of Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, where it's the hotbed and things are happening and you actually can go out there and do work, versus I'm sitting at the largest base in the country and there's all these people and their only jobs are just to move furniture around base. You're like, why are you here? What is your existence?
Giving out tickets, speeding tickets on the fob.
What are we doing here? So
one of my buddies has the record for like the most speeding tickets on the fob, and it's all he's like leaving the gym, driving as fast as he can to go because there's like something going on, and has to get on a bird to fly, like getting pulled over by the cops on post. So I think a part of that, and one of the frustrations that we felt, and again, I don't want to not throwing anybody under the bus. When the war first started, you basically had peacetime military guys that were in positions of leadership at the highest level, right? So completely different animal, and maybe some risk averseness and things like that. And I can't say I wouldn't criticize what they did. I think that that's definitely the way we felt. Whether that feeling was right or wrong, but definitely we felt like this is a risk averse peacetime, leadership that's hamstringing us from doing what we should be doing. I think in the couple of years transition from one to the next, I think that started to change out. I think that people understood like, hey, we need to put folks in there that maybe, will let us free will burn a little bit.
Well, I mean, I'll back the bus back up if you want and just run right back over them. I think that's that sentiment is felt across the board, even like maybe a little bit less today. But, I got a friend who he showed up in his squadron right to Libya, then back, then to Afghanistan, and then OIR, Afghanistan. Like all he does is just go like right place, right time. If you want to go fight, because that's where he's at, always doing it. Conversely, you get guys who are in leadership positions that they did 20 combat sorties. And it's not to knock them and not say they're not credible, because this is a broad statement, but you kind of get the vibe, especially when you hear like, hey, you're not going to stay in, like you're not very patriotic. You're like, but this guy has deployed like 6 times. How many times have you deployed? It's like, you really can't make that argument. So
yeah.
Again, that's a general statement. It's not all the way, but I think that does exist probably throughout the military in different spots.
I think too, in a way of defending those guys, imagine spending 18 or 22 years of your career and it being about your wall locker is squared away and this is the way you roll your socks and your boots aren't sharp and why are, your uniform look like this and I'm the garrison commander of, Fort Benning or, whatever it might be. And it's all very political and all very, don't have any fuck ups on my watch kind of thing. And imagine spending 22 years and being a 2-star that's now in charge of, oh, hey, what, hey, sir, can we go mow this thing down or,
right.
That's got to be a tough change too. Right. And that's why I say it's just, I think the military does a really good job of fighting its last battle.
Yeah, that's a fair way of putting it. I think that's also a fair way of assessing those guys, right? You're a sum of your experiences and the environment you grew up in. As we've mentioned, the military is really good at starting from the very basic and building you into whatever it wants to build you into. So if you've only known the importance of making sure the eyelets on your boots are black, and that's the most important thing, it's tough. I mean, it's tough for some guys to switch that mentality. So I do think that is a good point to bring up, that there's always a give and take. And I think it's important to put yourself in other people's shoes so you can think like them to hopefully maybe influence a decision.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you think about within the Ranger and Special Operations community, like from Vietnam, right? You had nothing until 83 when Grenada happened. And that was, the Rangers and unit operating and doing stuff there, a very short, non-sustained conflict. You had Panama, same thing. I think within 30 days, everything was in and out and done and over. Mogadishu, and then a little bit of conventional stuff that was happening in Bosnia and then later in Kosovo. So if you weren't on one of those things, like you didn't have it. And just to say that, okay, this guy went to Grenada or that guy was in Panama and this is what he did. And he was there for, 3 days and then came home. Like that's a completely different thing than spending 22 years of your career, in this garrison position. It's just so different, Yeah. And I would say, I think it's frustrating when you're living it and you're trying to sort out, hey, why aren't they letting us go do? But I totally can see both sides of that. And I think that's also, a good leader, a good subordinate even kind of can see multiple angles of the same thing. It's very easy to be like, oh, let us get after it. Well, I get it. But at the same time, there are multiple sides to every story. So
it's tough to, I think, from most people's perspective, right? Like, I'm guilty of this, but you're always worried about the nearest alligator to the boat or what's right in front of your face, what's going to kill you, which is warranted at times, right? Like, don't die. But if you're itching to get in a fight or whatever scenario it might be, like, the ability to pull yourself out and take a 30,000-foot look at the entire picture, if you can, or at least realize that maybe you don't have all the information and go out there and seek to build your picture, your essay bubble a little bit more, is a huge asset. And again, not an easy thing to do, but it might help you understand why something is not happening or why you're doing something, being able to put yourself in someone else's shoes or take a step back and try to gain a little bit of perspective on the scenario.
Yeah. Again, like if I was guilty of anything, it would be, kind of overthinking situations and maybe being too critical of a thinker and, trying to look and project and predict things that might happen that, whatever it might be. I think that there were some situations that helped me and there are definitely situations where that hurt me, but,
Yeah, no doubt.
You learn.
Well, yeah, that's the goal, right? Learn from it and learn from those mistakes, ingrain them, and then don't go out there and make the same mistakes again, or learn from other mistakes. That's really where you win. But I got to learn the hard way.
Yeah. I think it's very hard to go into the situation. And that was one of the things that was interesting to me was, I've said this before, and I feel like if I say it again, like if I say it, it will make a lot of people angry. That is not the intent. I know that there were significant engagements that happened in Afghanistan and Iraq, so I don't want to take away from anything. I do think that there are a lot of situations that made a lot of people feel more Audie Murphy than what they were. And I think that there were, again, it's like unless you experience that kind of life or death, extended, prolonged, there's no way out of this situation. I think it's very hard to, you know, understand what that's like to live with that at the same time also. So everything that I approached later in my military career, I had this monkey on my back of Mogadishu. And like, I can't just go be cavalier, I can't just like, oh yeah, it's just some guys with an AK. Like, okay, one dude with an AK can fuck up a lot of people's days. And then you're in a totally different situation. So don't take that lightly, and some of the really good, effective leaders that I had at Delta had been Mogadishu guys, and they understood that. So they dotted all the I's, they crossed the T's, they made sure things were in place and effective before, we're going to go hang ourselves out there. I don't have any issue hanging myself out there. If it's for the right thing, if I know that we're not just, willy-nilly just going to go run into gunfire, because I don't feel like that was my job as a Delta Force guy, You got to do what you got to do to live. But anyway, I think the guys that were really good leaders there, one of them specifically he would call the QRF even when we didn't need it, to exercise that, hey, we need you guys to roll out. Like, okay, is it going to take them 2 hours? Is it going to take them 30 minutes? We're a 17-minute drive from where they're located. How long is it going to take them to get here? And, that's an example to me of someone who made sure that when we needed them, and we did need them at times, that they were ready to roll and ready to come help, exfil it, whatever it might be. And he didn't finger drill that stuff. And, those are the things that I saw that were impressive to me, was guys that had learned the hard lessons and then were able to apply it. And maybe even at times put the reins on guys that were a little more cavalier and wanted to go hanging out there in a way that maybe wasn't as smart.
But just like hearing the Mogadishu story that day, I got fighting for a day with so many unknowns, and basically in my mind, I'm probably thinking like, I'm not walking out of this, but I'm just going to keep fighting, keep slugging it out, because that was the real first shootout, in like 20 plus years, like it wasn't, you didn't have all these stories that existed from the global war on terrorism that everyone hears today. So I can't imagine the fear that went into it, but it gives you that, it obviously gave you a respect, and knowing that it could be a 12-year-old with an AK, you can't discount him. He's still an enemy. He still gets a vote, and he can still wreck your world because he has a killing, device in his hands.
Yeah.
And I don't know, it seems like some of it gets glorified or glamorous, or it's like sexy. But at the end of the day, I know you can attest to this, like, people die, people get jacked up from this stuff, and one is like, what, hopefully it was for a good reason and good purpose, and it wasn't because someone was cavalier just to go in there and earn their battle stripes.
Well, like an example, you mentioned it just because of having the benefit of like 20 years of war, whereas like the last significant combat event that happened, aside from like Tet Offensive and some other things, was like the Ia Drang Valley in Vietnam, which was in '65. And so Mogadishu, after it happened, was kind of advertised as like, this is the most significant military, engagement since the Ia Drang Valley in 1965. That's 1993. That's just short of like 30 years, 28 years later. It's not like there was leadership, left over from that, and people had learned and things like that. But Yeah, that's kind of interesting to me. There just wasn't really a whole lot of that. So it was cool to see that. At least at the unit, there was a level of leadership that kind of understood some of those things and put things in perspective. As an example, it started becoming at the Rangers when you get promoted, you get sent to the E5 board or to become a sergeant, and they ask you questions, and you didn't ever want to be the guy that would be like, Sergeant Major, I don't know the answer to that question, but I will find it out and get back to you, right? You don't want to be that guy. And I don't think anybody, at least at my level in the Rangers that was in Mogadishu, understood that if a woman is in the street pointing out your location to enemy combatants, that she is actually acting as a forward observer and therefore an enemy combatant. And legally, not that it's fun or correct or right to do, but it is completely okay to engage that person. Nobody knew that. So there are a lot of things that happen like that in Mogadishu where we didn't even know it, even though it was military doctrine, because it was nothing that we had ever talked about. That's what I mean about like hindsight. Obviously, we can't go back and say, okay, it's 1992. What would you teach your subordinates? But it was more important smoking dudes to make them quit and making sure they could run fast than it was to like teach them all the things that maybe they would need to know on the field of battle should they ever be there. And that's an example of like peacetime Army, not smart, doing things, breaking people, stuff like that, just because you didn't have combat as a simulator for stress. So, how do you weed people out that shouldn't be there? You have to make stuff up. But anyway, that's an example to me, a perfect example of I have no idea what, if that's okay or not okay. I don't want to have to do this, so I'm going to do it.
Yeah.
And then dudes living with that for however many years and probably still don't understand that it's okay,
Yeah, well, you mentioned earlier in the podcast that we've been fighting our last fight, which we've only known now, counterterrorism ops for the last 20 years, 30 years, and that's what we've been focused on. They've been focused on near-peer fights. Maybe that's the next one, maybe it's not. But nonetheless, it's going to rear its head again where we have to either adapt, pivot, and learn what the new fight is, what the new rules are. Because again, focus on the islands right now. Maybe that's right, maybe it's not right, but it will change. It always does. So being able to pivot and handle the next situation is important, no matter what it is.
Yeah. So I promised a buddy that we've had this long-going kind of dialogue, and it's comedy, but I can't set it up the right way. But this definitely has to be a soundbite that we release on social media at some point. But basically, if I have PTSD from anything, it's that I had to watch Four Non-Blondes on MTV in the early 90s, like way more times than I can ever get back, and definitely caused some drama. Anyway, yeah, we had this thing. He sent me a video of an acoustic act. He was singing, Four Non-Blondes, like whatever the name of the song is. But man, I can never get over that.
Yeah, that's what I'll release for the promotion of this. It's like
Yeah.
Brad's done a ton of stuff, right?
Yeah.
But this is where it all went south.
What keeps me awake at night to this day, I'll never be able to get the voices out of my head. It's the Four Non-Blondes, whatever the name of that song was.
I'll have to go find it. Yeah, that's awesome.
So he was like, you should start like a support group for 4NB, vets for something along those lines, like support group.
We can tie it to the band, and it's a further outreach,
Yeah.
Well, on that, so I will ask you, I'll tee it up with, hey, if you found 15, 16-year-old Brad walking down the street, what advice would you give him? Before we do that, so you think about that, so you get these like salient points of wisdom. For those who are looking to find you, can you tell me a little about where they can find you, and Silence in the Light, just to kind of reiterate what you're doing with your life now with the band, so people can go out there and find you and support you.
I want to make this guy famous. This is Dude. Yeah. It is awesome.
If you follow Brad on Instagram, you'll see the dude.
You'll see Dude. So Brad Thomas Official, Silence and Light Official on Instagram. I think we've got Facebook and all that stuff. If you Google Silence and Light, you'll find our music. You would get our music anywhere you get your music, whether it's Spotify, Apple Music, iTunes, wherever. So we're taking, the gist of it was I didn't want to start my own foundation or something where I had to ask people for money. I wanted money to be a completely transparent thing. And I have a hard time to, give me your money so that I can give it to charity. So basically, you buy a song, you stream our music, and we're taking 100% of our profits from music royalties and giving those to 2 different charitable organizations. And right now we're contributing to Warrior's Heart, which is a physical, facility in Texas. I think they're standing up another facility, but it gets dudes clean. And, one of the side effects from PTSD is people that have alcohol and substance abuse issues. So the thing that I love about Warrior's Heart is that after they get you clean and you get therapy, they also use art as a form of therapy, whether it be music, painting, writing, sculpting, welding, whatever it might be. And that's super near and dear to me. And it's also not just for veterans. It could be from anybody struggling with PTSD. You could be a SWAT officer. You could be, it doesn't have to be some high-speed commando. And the other is Marine Raider Foundation, and that's something that gives kind of directly to, families of Marine Raiders that were lost, and it can help fly them across the country and, put their family up while their memorial service is going on and things like that. So it takes care and it does a lot of stuff. But both of those are awesome. Originally, each band member was going to have like his own charitable organization that he could talk about, and that's kind of the way it started. And then it turned into like I do all of the media stuff. So I was like, well, I can handle 1, maybe 2, and that's about it. But so we're taking 100% of our music royalties and contributing to those 2 organizations. And as well, it's not so much necessarily about financial contribution as it is too about helping spread the word that there's this thing that exists. And I know things have come full circle because I know people that have heard about Warrior's Heart that have then come back to me and said, man, I like heard about this thing. I ended up there. This is what it did for me. And I'm still alive because of it. And that's a pretty, if this reaches 2 people and it helps 1 person, then I'm happy about that. So I'll continue doing this for as long as I can. We're getting ready to record 2nd album. And we may switch up which organizations we give royalties to. People ask how they can help the band. And I'll tell you, it costs 35 G's out of pocket to record our first album. That's anything from having to travel to hotel rooms to eating food while you're, all of that stuff. And if people want to help the band, they can purchase any of our merchandise, and that helps us be able to pay for some of the things. It doesn't even, and it won't cover our costs unless this thing goes gold. But we've got a bunch of exciting stuff coming up. We're kind of rebranding slightly, and instead of being like, oh, those are the vets, we want to be a normal, functional band. We want, a lot of our merchandise to be something that people can relate to, that maybe has a little bit of depth, but also isn't, so veteran and everything else. So we've got a publicist that's going to be coming on board, and she's going to help spread the word, from also the veteran community, but, to the mainstream music community too. So
awesome.
And our mission won't change. We're still planning to take, 100% of everything and contribute to that. And if you Google Silence Online, we're all over everything there. It's going to take you to where, either music or podcasts or other stuff that I've done. It's all articles for Coffee or Die or Havoc Journal that I've written, all kinds of stuff out there. So
Perfect.
You asked me the question about what would the old me tell the young me. And I would say this, the young me didn't want to hear what the old me had to say. And the young me would have done, everything probably exactly the same. Like, I got no regrets. I'm a person that lives every day today as good as I can live it. I would much rather, and I've had this conversation with you offline too, but I would much rather talk about the things I'm doing now today than the things that I did, 27 years ago or 12 years ago. That's a part of who I am today, but that's not who I am today.
Right.
So, we could sit and talk music gear for hours and hours, but I also love talking about the veteran stuff, and I love being able to help and contribute in that way too. But I wouldn't have wanted to, you could have talked to me. I probably would have found it interesting. I could have talked to myself, right? But in one ear and out the other, man. I'm a person, I couldn't sit in school. I've had to get out there and do.
Yeah.
I don't learn that way. I don't, oh yes, teacher, I don't do that. Give me I want to drive the car. I don't want to sit on the simulator and goof around. I want to drive the car. Let's do that,
Let's do it. I love it, Brad. Thanks for joining me on the podcast. For those listening, I think you're going to hear more of Brad. We got some things in the works, which I'm excited about. I think we threw a line in the sand, but it'll just be a teaser that, again, Brad Thomas will be someone you'll hear more about. Check out Silence in the Light, doing some incredible work out there. Again, you can Google him. I'll throw him on the Afterburn podcast. But again, you can find Silence in the Light and find Brad Thomas out there if you just do a Google search for sure. So, Brad, thanks for joining me on the podcast today. I really enjoyed it, man.
And thank you. And I've said this to everybody that does a podcast, and you've got a very significant podcast. And, I know that might not be the typical audience, that I've spoken to before. And I'm intrigued by your community. And that's something that, I'd love to get into. But what you're doing too is every bit as significant as what I'm trying to do with the band. And you're giving people like me a platform, to a lot of people. And I appreciate that. The band appreciates that. And that's something that you're doing a hell of a service too. So thank you.
I appreciate it. It's fun to do. And again, I think it's a team effort, right? And we all play our part. And, started this, right? The whole goal is just be able to go out there and share information, and hopefully, someone hears something that makes their life a little bit better. And in the end, if it's just one person, I think it's worth it. So it's kind of cool to see this whole thing evolve. I've joked about it before, but I couldn't spell podcast now 2 years ago. So it's been a learning process to get to this point, which has been cool. And it's been fun, and meeting people like you. Again, like, our world's just kind of becomes smaller and connected, and to share these stories and capture these stories and experiences, I think it's very humbling to be a part of for me.
Yeah. No, awesome, man. Thank you.
Awesome, Brad. I really appreciate it.